It is your very first week at a brand new, highly intimidating, and terrifyingly unfamiliar corporate job. You are desperately trying to remember where the intensely confusing bathrooms are located, how to safely operate the incredibly complicated copy machine that looks exactly like a highly advanced spaceship, and what the actual first name of your highly confusing middle manager is. You are completely surrounded by a massive sea of incredibly blank, deeply exhausted faces staring completely blankly into their terribly expensive dual monitors. You feel entirely alone, profoundly isolated, and completely overwhelmed by the sheer, unadulterated bleakness of this heavily air-conditioned corporate purgatory. But then, a magical beacon of hope warmly appears. It is the incredibly friendly, highly welcoming coworker from exactly 2 cubicles down. They actively march over to your deeply sad, entirely empty desk with a massive, brilliantly warm smile. They are holding a perfectly baked, entirely homemade blueberry muffin. They warmly tell you that they are so incredibly thrilled you have joined the corporate family, and they strictly insist that you must come to them if you absolutely ever need anything at all. Stop right there. Take a very deep, extremely shaky breath, carefully put down that completely delicious, highly toxic baked good, and absolutely run for your incredibly fragile life. That person is absolutely not your friendly workplace savior. They are an incredibly dangerous, highly calculating apex predator, and you are actively stepping directly into their deeply terrifying psychological web. Let us have a very quiet, thoroughly depressing, and completely honest conversation about the absolute worst, most intensely terrifying archetype in the entire modern corporate ecosystem: the overwhelmingly nice, deeply overly friendly coworker. When you are entirely new to a highly toxic office environment, your desperately fragile human brain is fiercely searching for any highly basic sign of safety. You are actively operating in pure, unadulterated survival mode. So, when this highly cheerful, aggressively pleasant person actively targets you with their massive barrage of compliments and entirely unearned warmth, you entirely, completely fall for it. You forcefully drop your highly necessary emotional shields. You genuinely, deeply believe that you have magically found a highly loyal, completely trustworthy ally in this massively depressing, entirely soulless corporate wasteland. Haha, what an absolutely spectacular, incredibly massive, completely fatal miscalculation on your deeply naive part. You have absolutely not found a loyal friend. You have entirely, aggressively stumbled directly into the highly toxic, completely unavoidable blast zone of the office gossip cartel's absolute most ruthless, highly effective operational mastermind. Let us vividly and intensely break down the exact, highly tragic anatomy of this deeply terrifying workplace dynamic. Let us actively observe the highly dangerous, nice coworker in their totally natural, heavily decorated habitat. Their desk is an absolute, highly curated masterpiece of psychological manipulation. They actively have a massive, highly visible glass bowl filled entirely to the brim with highly expensive, individually wrapped chocolates. Why? Because the candy bowl is a highly effective, deeply insidious physical trap. It actively forces heavily exhausted, totally desperate coworkers to physically approach their highly strategic location just to get a brief sugar rush. They have perfectly framed, highly adorable pictures of completely innocent golden retrievers and deeply happy nieces and nephews aggressively plastered across every single available inch of their fabric cubicle walls. And they constantly, aggressively use highly soothing, entirely gentle vocal tones. They entirely, flawlessly present themselves as the highly nurturing, completely safe office parental figure. They fiercely want you to entirely believe that they are completely immune to the highly toxic, deeply competitive corporate politics actively swirling completely around them. But underneath that highly manufactured, entirely synthetic veneer of pure Midwestern sweetness, beats the highly cold, heavily calculating heart of an absolute, deeply relentless information broker. Let us strictly walk through the exact, highly traumatic, completely unforgettable timeline of your absolute psychological destruction. It is exactly 10:15 a.m. on a completely mundane, heavily overcast Wednesday morning. You are standing completely quietly in the highly depressing, terribly lit corporate break room. You are actively trying to successfully operate the highly complicated, deeply terrifying espresso machine that aggressively sounds like a highly defective jet engine when you press the incredibly confusing buttons. The incredibly nice coworker warmly glides into the terribly small room. They give you a massive, highly comforting smile. They softly ask exactly how your very first week is entirely going, and they actively listen with deeply intense, highly manufactured empathy as you nervously, desperately, ramble about your totally minor, highly relatable struggles with the completely broken intranet portal software. They nod encouragingly, validating every single completely mundane frustration you express, skillfully drawing you entirely out of your heavily guarded shell. You actively feel a profound sense of human connection, completely unaware that you are willingly handing them highly valuable conversational ammunition. And then, there is exactly one other totally exhausted person in the highly cramped break room. Let us just completely randomly call her Brenda from highly aggressive corporate accounting. Brenda is quietly washing her deeply stained ceramic coffee mug in the incredibly tiny, heavily stained stainless steel sink. The nice coworker warmly, loudly, asks Brenda exactly how her highly anticipated weekend was, and Brenda politely, heavily sighs and actively mutters a completely generic, entirely acceptable response about doing laundry and buying expensive groceries. The nice coworker completely beams with absolute, undeniable warmth, cheerfully telling Brenda that they completely hope she has an incredibly fantastic rest of her Wednesday. Brenda gives a tight, entirely exhausted smile before quietly, rapidly exiting the terrible break room to aggressively return to her highly massive, entirely terrifying spreadsheets. And then, it actively, violently happens. The exact, highly terrifying moment that completely, entirely shatters your highly fragile perception of this completely miserable corporate reality. The very second Brenda's heavily sensible shoes completely round the highly gray, deeply boring hallway corner, the entirely nice coworker's totally warm, completely open facial expression violently, entirely drops. The incredibly comforting, highly bright smile actively vanishes, instantly replaced by a completely flat, deeply predatory, highly conspiratorial stare. They physically, aggressively lean their entirely pastel-covered body directly toward your totally unsuspecting, deeply fragile personal space. They actively look strictly over their completely innocent shoulder to highly ensure the terribly lit hallway is completely, entirely empty. And then, they softly, maliciously whisper directly into your totally naive ear, "I feel so incredibly, deeply sorry for Brenda. You actively know she completely messed up the massive quarter-end reconciliation report, right? We completely think she is entirely off her heavily prescribed medication again. It is highly, deeply tragic, honestly. I am just so incredibly worried for her entirely fragile mental state." The entire terribly lit break room completely and utterly freezes. The heavily terrifying jet engine sound of the completely broken espresso machine entirely fades into a dull, terribly quiet, heavily echoing hum. You instantly, violently stop breathing. The blood completely and entirely drains from your heavily exhausted, intensely pale face. You fiercely stand there, absolutely totally paralyzed, actively clutching your incredibly hot, highly terrible paper cup of corporate coffee, while your completely panicked brain aggressively attempts to entirely process the highly massive, deeply terrifying psychological bomb that was just violently detonated directly inside your totally fragile mind. Off her highly prescribed medication? We completely think she is off her medication. Who exactly is we? How do you actively, confidently know anything about her highly personal, completely confidential medical history? This deeply nice, entirely sweet person who actively offered you a highly delicious homemade muffin exactly 48 hours ago just casually, violently assassinated another totally exhausted human being's highly professional and entirely personal reputation with the absolute, completely terrifying precision of a highly trained, deeply sociopathic corporate sniper. And then, the absolute, highly devastating, entirely permanent psychological snap violently echoes through your entire fragile nervous system. It is a profoundly terrifying, highly complex, entirely undeniable mathematical equation that instantly, aggressively, solves itself directly inside your completely panicked brain. If this incredibly nice, highly friendly person is actively, confidently willing to violently whisper a deeply horrible, highly destructive, entirely unverified rumor about Brenda's highly personal medical history directly to you, a completely brand new, entirely unknown employee who has actively been in this heavily toxic building for exactly 3 miserable days. What in the absolute, deeply terrifying world are they actively, confidently whispering about you when you completely leave the terribly small break room? The absolute, highly chilling answer is incredibly, deeply obvious. They are actively gossiping about you. They are completely, undeniably tearing your highly fragile reputation to absolute, tiny shreds the exact second your physical body entirely leaves their immediate line of sight. So, to entirely summarize this incredibly depressing, highly tragic journey into the dark abyss of corporate paranoia, if you are currently entirely new to a deeply toxic office environment, and a completely cheerful, incredibly warm person aggressively offers you a highly delicious homemade baked good while softly asking about your personal life, absolutely do not consume the baked good. Immediately politely decline, turn around, and violently walk directly away toward the nearest exit. If you have ever entirely trusted a deeply nice, highly terrifying corporate sociopath, only to violently discover they were actively broadcasting your completely confidential business to the entire deeply miserable department, fiercely hit the like button right now. Subscribe to the completely cynical channel so we can proudly, actively continue to totally bond over our highly justified, completely immense workplace trust issues entirely together. And please, strongly drop a highly detailed comment below, aggressively telling me the exact, terribly painful story of the devastating rumor the entirely nice coworker spread about you. I desperately need to strictly read every single one of them tonight to actively remind my entirely broken self exactly why I now confidently eat my entirely cold takeout noodles completely alone in my highly secure vehicle every single day. Stay highly silent. Fiercely guard your completely precious peace, entirely trust absolutely no one holding a beautifully decorated ceramic mug, and I will strictly see you in the next completely miserable one.